The mountains of Colorado don't just rise, they loom. From a distance, they look peaceful. Snow-dusted peaks cutting into the sky, forests stretching for miles, silence that feels almost holy. But once you're inside them, that silence changes. It presses in. The air thins. Sounds carry too far, or not at all. Colorado is a place of extremes. Towering mountains that can swallow entire storms. Forests so dense the sun barely touches the ground. Mining towns that sprang up overnight and vanished just as fast, leaving behind collapsed buildings, rusted equipment, and questions no one bothered to answer. And hidden among it all are government installations built directly into the rock. Facilities, we're told, are for defense or training or nothing at all. Places that hum quietly beneath the surface while life goes on above them, unaware or pretending to be. Out here, people disappear. Experienced hikers, hunters who know the land, locals who grew up respecting the mountains and still didn't make it home. Sometimes they're found days later, miles from where they should be. Sometimes all that's left behind is a boot, a jacket, or a trail that simply stops. Then there are the things people see. Tall shapes moving between the trees where no trail exists. Footsteps pacing campsites just outside the firelight. Calls echoing through valleys that don't sound like any animal on record. Something watching from higher ground, always just out of view. Entire towns have their own ghosts. Mining communities abandoned after fires, cave-ins, or economic collapse. But locals will tell you some places were cleared out fast, too fast, as if everyone agreed, without saying it out loud, that it was time to leave. And there are places people don't go after dark. Not because of posted signs, not because of park rules, but because everyone knows. Roads where engines stall, forests where the sound suddenly dies, valleys where the feeling in your chest tells you you're not alone, and you never were. Tonight, we're going deep into Colorado's hidden side. The creatures said to roam the Rockies, the towns that vanished without explanation, the installations built into the mountains meant to keep secrets buried. Because at higher elevations, the air gets thinner, and so does the line between what's real and what's watching. Colorado sells itself as clean air and open skies. A place to start over. A place to escape the past. But the past didn't leave. It settled into the mountains, seeped into the soil, and waited. High above Estes Park sits the Stanley Hotel, bright white, pristine, and impossible to ignore. By day, it looks like a luxury retreat. By night, it feels like something else entirely. This is the hotel that inspired The Shining. Stephen King didn't invent the fear here. He absorbed it. Guests report children running through the halls late at night, laughing and playing, even when there are no children staying in the hotel. Others hear piano music drifting from empty rooms, soft and deliberate, as if someone is practicing for an audience that never arrives. Room 217 is the most infamous. Visitors describe lights flickering on and off, luggage unpacked while they're gone, the sensation of someone standing too close behind them. Some say the room feels welcoming at first, warm, calm even, until it suddenly doesn't. Employees who work the night shift talk about doors opening on their own, footsteps overhead when no one has checked in, and a feeling that whatever is here isn't trying to scare you. It's simply continuing on, unaware that it's no longer alive. Cheeseman Park looks peaceful. Wide lawns, joggers, dogs chasing tennis balls. But beneath the grass is a mass grave. In the late 1800s, this land was a cemetery. When the city decided it wanted a park instead, officials claimed the bodies would be relocated. Families were told their loved ones would be moved respectfully. They weren't. Graves were dug hastily. Coffins were damaged. Many bodies were left behind, sometimes only partially removed. Locals still find bones surfacing after heavy rains. Teeth, fragments, proof that the dead were never meant to stay quiet here. People report apparitions moving between trees at dusk. Shadowy figures standing where headstones once were. And at night, residents nearby claim they hear digging sounds beneath the ground. Slow, deliberate scraping, as if something is trying to get out. Not haunting for attention, haunting out of neglect. During Colorado's mining boom, towns like Central City and Cripple Creek exploded with life. Gold meant money. Money meant excess. And excess meant vice. Miners died young. Collapsed tunnels, gas explosions, and cave-ins. Prostitutes and gamblers lived fast, violent lives. Shootouts weren't rare. Neither were bodies buried without names. Today, these towns still feel very crowded. Visitors report seeing figures in period clothing standing in doorways. Women laughing from empty rooms. The smell of cigar smoke where no one has been smoking. Slot machines activating on their own late at night. Some say they feel hands brush past them in narrow hallways. Others describe a sudden sadness that hits without warning, as if the walls themselves remember every loss. These spirits don't feel malicious. They feel unfinished. Colorado didn't bury its dead properly. Not emotionally, not historically, and in some cases, not literally. The mountains remember the labor, the greed, and the desperation. The land absorbed all of it, and now it gives pieces of it back, quietly, patiently, to anyone willing to look a little too closely. And as we move deeper into Colorado, one thing becomes clear. The dead aren't the only things still walking these mountains. Colorado is massive, wild, beautiful in a way that makes you forget how easily it can kill you. That's the story we're told anyway. Because when people vanish in these mountains, the explanation almost always sounds reasonable. Too reasonable. The terrain is unforgiving. The weather changes fast. Altitude sickness, disorientation, exposure. nature becomes the perfect excuse. But when you look closer, a pattern starts to form. There is an area stretching through the Rocky Mountains that locals and researchers quietly refer to as the Colorado Triangle. There are no signs marking it, no official boundaries, just a growing list of disappearances clustered too tightly to ignore. Hikers vanish from well-marked trails. Hunters go missing during daylight hours. Experienced outdoorsmen, people who know how to read the weather, who carry gear, who respect the land, simply just don't come back. Search and rescue teams often find nothing. No blood, no sign of struggle, sometimes not even footprints. And when something is found, it's wrong. Boots left neatly behind, clothes folded, bodies discovered miles uphill from where they were last seen, in terrain that would have been nearly impossible to reach in their condition. And sometimes, there's nothing at all. No trace. As if the mountains swallowed them whole. Then, there are the towns. Colorado is littered with abandoned mining communities. Places that once thrived, then emptied almost overnight. Official records blame fires, cave-ins, or economic collapse. Gold dried up, jobs disappeared, people moved on. But small towns didn't fade. They evacuated. Entire communities left behind belongings. Furniture still inside homes. Tools still inside sheds. As if no one expected to be gone for long and then never returned. Locals talk about collapses that didn't make sense. Fires that spread too fast. Sinkholes that opened without warning. And whispers that certain areas were declared unsafe without clear explanations. Sometimes the land itself seemed to give way. Blizzards are blamed often. Whiteouts, sudden storms, altitude sickness causing confusion and panic. And yes, Colorado weather is brutal. But it doesn't explain why seasoned hikers disappear in clear days. Why storms are cited when weather reports show calm skies. Why search dogs lose scent abruptly, as if the trail didn't fade, it ended. It doesn't explain why some bodies are found without injuries consistent with exposure, or why others are discovered in places already searched multiple times. Nature is dangerous, but randomness has rhythm, and that doesn't feel random. What connects these cases isn't just geography, it's silence. Official reports close quickly. Families are told there's nothing more to be done. Files gather dust. Questions are labeled speculation. But when enough people vanish the same way, in the same places, under the same explanations, it stops sounding like bad luck. It starts sounding like avoidance. Like something is happening out there that no one wants to name. And as we move forward, away from missing and toward what might be responsible, we have to ask an uncomfortable question. Are people getting lost in Colorado? Or are they being taken? If you want to understand why Colorado keeps showing up in Bigfoot reports, you have to look at the terrain first. The Rockies aren't gentle. They're steep, unpredictable, and vast enough to hide entire ecosystems we barely understand. Dense forests, sudden elevation changes, miles of land where cell service dies and footsteps vanish into pine needles and snow. And in these places, people keep seeing the same thing. The San Juan Mountains are one of the most frequently mentioned regions. Locals describe deep wilderness that feels untouched, areas where trails simply disappear and the forest closes in. Sightings here often happen at dawn or dusk, when the light distorts distance and sound carries further than it should. In the Roosevelt National Forest, reports tend to come from hikers and hunters who notice movement where no trail exists. Something stepping between trees too large to be a bear, too upright to be anything else. Witnesses often say they feel watched long before they see anything, like the forest itself went quiet to make room for it. Then there's Pike National Forest, where encounters happen disturbingly close to established trails. Campers describe heavy footsteps circling tents at night. Deep, rhythmic pacing that doesn't match elk or moose. Sometimes it stops just outside the firelight. Sometimes it doesn't stop at all. What's unsettling is how similar these reports are, despite coming from people who've never spoken to each other. The descriptions don't vary much. Witnesses consistently report a figure that's tall, well over 7 feet, broad-shouldered, and built for power. Not bulky like a bear, but solid, proportional, purposeful. The hair is usually described as reddish-brown or very dark, matted and thick, blending almost perfectly into the tree line. Many say it doesn't shine like animal fur. It absorbs light. Movement is where things get harder to dismiss. People describe it covering steep, uneven ground with ease. Long strides uphill, as if gravity doesn't apply the same way. No scrambling, no slipping, just steady motion, even on inclines that leave experienced hikers breathless. Several witnesses mention the same detail. Once it realizes it's been seen, it doesn't panic. It doesn't run. It leaves. Skeptics often point to misidentification, bears standing upright, shadows, or exhaustion. But bears don't walk smoothly uphill for extended distances. They don't pace campsites. They don't move with deliberate awareness of being watched. And exhaustion doesn't explain why multiple people describe the same body shape, the same movement, the same feeling of being sized up rather than threatened. This isn't panic-driven hallucination. It's observation. But that raises a far more uncomfortable question. If people across Colorado are seeing the same thing, then whatever it isn't lost. It knows exactly where it is. Seeing something in the forest is one thing. Hearing it is another. Because sound lingers, they echo, they stay with you long after you convince yourself there must be a reasonable explanation. In Colorado, many Bigfoot researchers and witnesses draw comparisons to something recorded decades earlier in California, what are known as the Sierra sounds. Audio recordings that captured vocalization unlike any officially documented in wildlife studies. And what's really unsettling is how closely Colorado reports seem to match them. Hunters and hikers across the Rockies describe deep, resonant calls that don't behave like animal noises. They aren't random howls or distress cries. They're structured. Long whoops that rise and fall. Short, sharp calls that sound like responses. Sometimes overlapping like multiple voices communicating across distance. Witnesses often say the sound feels intentional, directed, as if something is announcing its presence without revealing its location. And once you hear it, the forest changes. Then there are the wood knocks. 3 sharp strikes against a tree, evenly spaced, repeated from different directions. Experienced outdoorsmen recognize the difference between falling branches and deliberate impact. These sounds are controlled, measured, sometimes answered by another knock further away. It feels less like an animal marking territory and more like coordination. Some researchers believe these knocks serve as signals, ways to track humans moving through an area, or to warn others of an intruder without making direct contact. The most disturbing reports involve what witnesses describe as language. Not words, not anything recognizable, but pattern vocalizations, rhythmic, expressive, emotional. Sounds that rise in intensity, then soften. Pauses where it feels like listening, not just calling. People say it sounds closer to a conversation than a call. And once it starts, it rarely comes from one direction. That implication is hard to ignore. This is where fear sets in. Many hikers report being followed, paced through the forest, footsteps matching their speed, stopping when they stop, moving again when they move. The sounds never rush, never close in. They stay just out of sight, maintaining distance with an intelligence that suggests strategy. Witnesses describe feeling herded, nudged off certain trails, guided downhill, or pushed back toward open areas. And the moment they leave the forest, the sound stops. Not fade, stop. The Sierra sounds were dismissed by many as hoaxes. Too complex, too unsettling, too intelligent. But Colorado complicates that dismissal. Because these reports come from people who haven't heard the recordings. People who weren't looking for Bigfoot. People who don't want attention. And yet, they describe the same vocal range, the same rhythm, the same experience of being watched without being attacked. Which forces the question no one likes to ask. If the sounds are communication, who are they meant for? And more importantly, what happens when you answer? Long before Bigfoot had a name, the mountains already knew it. Before maps, before mining towns, before trails were cut into the Rockies, the land was watched and understood by the people who lived on it first. And their stories don't describe monsters. They describe neighbors. Among the Ute and Arapaho peoples, there are long-standing stories of wild mountain beings, large, human-like figures that lived deep in the high country. These beings were not hunted, not challenged, and rarely spoken of directly. They were known to avoid humans, but not ignore them. Stories describe hairy men who stayed just beyond camps, observing, watching, learning routines. The warning wasn't that they were violent, it was that they were territorial. If you respected the land, they kept their distance. If you didn't, the mountains themselves became dangerous. These beings were often associated with boundary spaces, tree lines, mountain passes, high ridges where weather shifts suddenly and sound carries unnaturally far. Places where humans weren't meant to linger. And what's striking is this: they weren't treated as myths. They were treated as known risks. In many accounts, elders didn't tell stories to scare children. They gave instructions. Don't camp in certain valleys. Don't follow voices in the dark. If the forest goes silent, leave. These weren't warnings about animals. They were about something that understood people. Something that chose when to be seen. When settlers pushed into Colorado, they brought journals, not folklore. And scattered through those writings are details that don't fit clean narratives of frontier hardship. Entries describing food disappearing from camps without disturbance. No torn bags, no scattered supplies. Just gone. Mentions of footprints too large to belong to any known animal, appearing overnight near wagons or along tree lines. Human-shaped, bare, too evenly spaced to be accidental. Some settlers wrote about feeling watched while working alone, about hearing movement parallel to their own in the dense timber. A few even mentioned deciding to abandon certain routes entirely, not because of weather, but because of unease. They didn't call it Bigfoot. They just wrote down what they saw and moved on. What connects indigenous accounts and settler records isn't fear. It's restraint. These beings weren't charging camps or attacking communities. They were observing, avoiding, occasionally taking what they needed, and reminding humans when they crossed a line. Which complicates the modern narrative. Because if something has been here this long, if it knows the land better than we ever will, then the question isn't why we can't find it. It's why it's tolerated us for so long. This is where the conversation gets uncomfortable. Because once you start lining up Bigfoot sightings with missing person cases, the overlap becomes hard to ignore. Not because it proves anything, but because it keeps repeating. And repetition demands attention. Across Colorado, many disappearances occur within the same region where Bigfoot sightings are most frequently reported. Deep wilderness, high elevation forests, areas with limited access and poor visibility. Hikers vanish shortly after reporting strange encounters. Hunters fail to return from zones locals quietly avoid. In some cases, witnesses come forward after a disappearance, saying they saw something days or weeks earlier, but they didn't think it mattered at the time. Nothing connects these cases officially, but geographically, they overlap too cleanly. When evidence is found, it often raises more questions than answers. Shoes sometimes placed upright, backpacks without signs of struggle, clothing discovered far from logical routes. Search and rescue teams are trained to recognize how people behave when they're lost or injured. People leave signs. Confusion leaves trails. But some of the scenes don't look chaotic. They look interrupted. And then there's the silence. Survivors and rescuers describe moments when the forest goes completely quiet. No birds, no insects, no wind through the trees. That silence is reported during both Bigfoot encounters and during searches for missing persons. It's not proof of anything, but it's consistent. Predators don't usually create silence. Animals react. Something else seems to be happening here. There are three main theories people tend to circle back to. None of them are easy. The predator theory suggests Bigfoot is a highly intelligent, undiscovered species capable of hunting humans when threatened or desperate. Rare, calculated, efficient. The territorial guardian theory paints a different picture. It paints Bigfoot as a protector of land, removing humans who stray too far into restricted areas. Not malicious, just uncompromising. Then there's the theory that refuses to stay buried. That these beings aren't fully physical in the way we understand. That they can move through the terrain without leaving consistent evidence. That people don't vanish into the forest, they vanish out of it. This theory is often dismissed as fantasy. But it keeps resurfacing because it explains what nothing else does. No official agency will connect these dots. No report will ever list Bigfoot as a factor. But families are still left without answers. Trails still go cold. And the mountains keep their silence. Whether Bigfoot is a predator, a protector, or something far stranger, the pattern remains. People enter certain parts of Colorado, and some of them don't come back. And whatever else may be out there, it seems to know exactly where the line is. If something like Bigfoot exists, truly exists, then the biggest question isn't what is it? It's who knows. Because creatures don't live in national parks by accident. National parks aren't just protected land. They're controlled land. Federal jurisdiction. Limited access. Restricted airspace in some regions. Areas where movement can be monitored, managed, and quietly redirected. On paper, this is about conservation. But it also means one thing very clearly. What hides inside a national park doesn't belong to local authorities. It belongs to the federal government. And that matters when incidences don't fit tiny explanations. Among search and rescue volunteers and former park employees, there are persistent stories never official, never documented, of teams arriving unusually fast after certain reports. Not lost hikers, not injuries. Reports involving something else. Witnesses describe being told to leave areas abruptly. Roads closed without explanation. Helicopters arriving when weather supposedly made flying unsafe. And then the story changes. Families of missing persons often encounter the same wall, files that can't be accessed, details withheld for privacy, and cases closed without clear conclusions. Some reports reference animal attacks that don't align with known wildlife behavior, injuries that don't match bears or mountain lions, trauma inconsistent with falls or exposure. The explanation is always the same. These things happen in the wilderness. But wilderness doesn't produce paperwork gaps. When something can't be explained, it's labeled wildlife. Mountain lion, bear, elk. But experienced hunters know how animals kill. Search teams know what predation looks like. And in certain cases, the evidence simply doesn't fit. So it gets simplified. Because a mystery invites questions. And questions invite attention. There's a reason Bigfoot, if it exists, is always tied to federal land. A reason sightings cluster around parks, forests, and restricted zones. A reason's encounters rarely end in proof, but often in silence. Which brings us to the question no agency will ever answer. Is Bigfoot being protected as an undiscovered species too destabilizing to reveal? Or is it being contained because it doesn't belong in our world as cleanly as we'd like to believe? Either way, the result is the same. The public is kept at a distance, the truth stays buried, and the mountains remain off limits in ways we're never meant to understand. Because some things aren't hidden to keep us safe. They're hidden to keep them where they are. If the mountains of Colorado hide things in their forests, they hide even more beneath their stone. Because long before conspiracy theories took hold, the government understood something very simple. The safest place to build is where no one can see. Cheyenne Mountain is one of the most heavily reinforced military installations in the world. Carved directly into solid granite, it was built to survive nuclear attack, natural disaster, and officially, almost anything. What we're told is straightforward. It's a defense command center, a place to monitor threats, a relic of the Cold War that still serves a purpose. What's rumored is something else entirely. Stories circulate about levels far below what's publicly acknowledged, about doors that don't appear on maps, about entire sections sealed off from personnel who aren't cleared to ask questions. Former workers have hinted carefully at systems that go deeper than expected. Infrastructure designed not to just withstand disaster, but to function independently for long periods of time. Longer than the public realizes. Cheyenne Mountain isn't believed to stand alone. Across Colorado and neighboring western states, there are persistent rumors of underground tunnel networks connecting military installations, research facilities, and secure storage sites. These aren't small tunnels. They're described as wide enough for vehicles, equipped with rail systems, ventilation shafts described as natural rock formations, entire routes carved through mountains to allow movement without ever surfacing. The idea of underground cities sounds extreme until you consider how much easier it is to hide something underground than in the open, and how little of the American West has truly been mapped below the surface. DUMBs are a staple for modern conspiracy theory, but they don't appear out of nowhere. The theory suggests deep underground military bases exist across the western United States, built to conduct research away from public oversight. Colorado is frequently named as a hub due to its geography, elevation, and existing infrastructure. Alleged connections stretch through New Mexico, Utah, Nevada, and beyond, forming a web beneath states already known for secrecy. Critics dismiss these claims as speculation. Supporters point to budget discrepancies, restricted land, and sudden infrastructure projects with no public explanation. And then there are the sightings. Colorado has a long history of UFO sightings, particularly near military installations and restricted airspace. Lights moving silently, crafts hovering, then accelerating at impossible speeds. Objects entering or exiting mountain regions where facilities are known or suspected to exist. Witnesses often report the same detail. When military aircraft appear, the unknown objects vanish. Whether that suggests coordination, containment, or coincidence is up to debate. But the pattern remains. When you step back, a troubling image forms. Above ground, forests where people disappear, creatures that may not want to be found. Below ground, facilities built to endear anything, tunnels connecting places we are not meant to connect, silence enforced through classification and distance. And the question becomes unavoidable. What if Colorado isn't just a hotspot for the unexplained? What if it's a containment zone for the things found, things hidden, and things that were never meant to surface? Because sometimes the most dangerous secrets aren't buried in the past. They're buried in the mountain beneath your feet. If Colorado feels different, it's because it is. Not just geographically, but energetically. Vast stretches of land sit at extreme elevation. Magnetic anomalies are reported. The sky feels closer. And in certain places, reality itself seems thinner. No place represents that better than the San Luis Valley. The San Luis Valley has long been considered one of the most active paranormal regions in the United States. It's wide, flat, and ringed by mountains, isolated in a way that feels intentional. For decades, ranchers have reported cattle mutilations, animals found drained of blood, precise surgical cuts, no traces, no signs of struggle. Organs removed with an accuracy that doesn't match predators or known tools. Law enforcement investigations have come and gone. Explanations range from scavengers to decomposition. But locals will tell you those answers don't hold up when you see the bodies firsthand. And the mutilations aren't the only thing happening. Residents of the San Luis Valley frequently report unexplained lights, orbs hovering just above the ground, silent craft moving against the wind, objects that vanish instantly when approached. Some lights appear to follow vehicles. Others emerge from the mountains themselves. What's unsettling is how normalized it's become. People don't rush to report sightings anymore. They just close the curtains and wait for it to pass. Then, there are the stories that don't photograph well. People describe driving familiar roads and suddenly realizing hours have passed. Watches stopped, phones reset, entire conversations forgotten. Others report feeling disoriented, nauseous, or emotionally unsettled after passing through certain areas, like something briefly pulled them out of sync. No objection narratives, no dramatic events, just gaps. Some researchers believe Colorado sits at the intersection of ley lines, ancient energy pathways theorized to crisscross the earth. Whether symbolic or literal, these lines often pass through sites of immense activity, sacred ground, geological fault lines, and unexplained hotspots. Combine that with Colorado's extreme altitude and unique geology, and you get a region where electromagnetic conditions may behave differently. Different enough to interfere with perception. Different enough to open something. When you layer it all together, the disappearances, the creatures, the underground facilities, the lights, it stops feeling like coincidence. Colorado offers isolation, control, elevation, and silence. Perfect conditions for observation, for experimentation, or for places where the veil between worlds wears thin. Maybe Colorado attracts high strangeness, or maybe it creates it. Because when that land holds memory, pressure, and secrecy for long enough, eventually something pushes back. And when it does, the sky isn't always where it comes from. Colorado is a land of extremes. High peaks that pierce the sky. Valleys so wide they feel infinite. Forests so dense that the wind itself seems to bend around them. It's a place where isolation isn't just a feeling, it's a reality. We've walked through its shadows tonight. The Stanley Hotel, where laughter and music linger long after the living have gone. Cheeseman Park, where the earth itself refuses to keep the dead quiet. Mining towns abandoned overnight, leaving belongings behind as if people vanished into another dimension. And then the mountains themselves. The places where people disappear, leaving no trace. Where those who survive report being watched, fouled, paced. Where Bigfoot may walk in silence, and maybe it has for centuries, avoiding us but always observing. Beneath the mountains, we've seen a different kind of mystery. NORAD and Cheyenne Mountains, tunnels, hidden bases, DUMBs rumored to stretch across the West, places where humans maintain control over what we can see and what we aren't meant to find. Above, the skies aren't safe either. The San Luis Valley glows with unexplained lights. Cattle disappear with surgical precision. Time itself seems to bend, just enough to make us question whether reality is fixed or fragile. Maybe Colorado isn't hiding secrets. Maybe it's protecting them. Protecting the mountains, the forests, the valleys, and the things that move through them in ways we can't explain. We often think of nature as something we can conquer, map, or understand. But the truth is more humbling. Kahlo reminds us that nature doesn't belong to us. That some things aren't meant to be documented, measured, or dissected. Some things remain undiscovered by choice, and perhaps for good reason. And as you leave the forests, the mountains, the valley of your mind tonight, remember this. There are places where humans aren't in charge, where the land itself carries the memory of what came before and what still lingers. Places where silence is deliberate, observation is patient, and secrets are meant to endear. Maybe that's what makes Colorado unforgettable. Not the peaks, not the rivers, not even the legends, but the fact that it refuses to give itself fully to us. And maybe we're better off respecting that. Before we close tonight, I want to hear from you. The people who wander the mountains, explore the forests, or pay attention to what doesn't fit neatly in the daylight. Have you experienced something strange in Colorado? A shadow moving through a tree when no one else was around? Strange footprints or an encounter with something taller, hairier, and impossibly fast? Maybe you've been on a hike and never forgot the way the forest fell silent, or the way a light appeared in the sky where it shouldn't have. Or perhaps you have stories of disappearances, unusual military activity, or government installations in Colorado that left you questioning what's really going on. If you do, I want to hear them. You can submit your stories to hexes, haunts, and howls at gmail.com. Again, that's hexes, haunts, and howls, all one word, at gmail.com. All stories will remain anonymous. Your experiences, your questions, your encounters, they all matter, and they can be part of our next episode. Send them in, and let the mountains, the forests, and even the skies of Colorado remain part of a shared exploration of the unknown. Thank you for listening to Hexes, Haunts, and Howls. I'm your host, Cupcake. Until next time, stay sweet.